producing audiobooks.
Thank you all for coming. Harnessing the Power of Audiobooks. I love the title that Tom came up with because audiobooks are powerful. And if you have written a book, which I think many of you have, and we'll talk about that in a moment, then you definitely want to take advantage of this. So I think the purpose and my goal tonight is to tell you why you want an audiobook, which won't take long because it's pretty self-explanatory. And then the longer portion, how to make your audiobook. And in there you can decide, is this something I can take on my own, or do I need to hire a producer? So I spent much of my summer producing an audiobook and learned a whole lot. So as a teacher, I just really like to share my experiences and share the ups and downs and ins and outs and give you a little bit of perspective and help you out along the way if I can. My background is in television news, where Tom was at 9 News this morning doing a morning show interview. I used to be a morning show anchor and reporter, so it was one of those, let's get up at 1 o'clock in the morning and start driving all over the place if there's a snowstorm, or head to the station and anchor the show. Kind of a crazy life. I did it for about a year exactly after having my first child, and then was so exhausted that I said there's got to be a better way. But I still love news. I love things that are new. I love producing, which is what I do now and have been doing for the past 7 years on a freelance basis, and started my own company called Honk Media. And so it's kind of like working in news without having to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning. I can get each of your ideas and try to craft it into a beautiful story, or in your case, if you already have it into a story, try to craft it into a different form of that story and get it out. So in a way, it's almost like repeating the news business. You're taking information, you're developing it into something great, and releasing it to the public, which is probably what many of you have done with your books already. So why do you want an audiobook? I mean, the basic answer is because people are buying them. People want an audiobook. I just attended a presentation on campus at CU a couple of days ago talking about the future of the book. And a professor from UCLA was lamenting the fact that people don't read anymore. Nobody wants to pick up a big volume and page through it, but people will listen to an audiobook. They might be commuting, they might just have it on their MP3 player while they're out for a long run. It's just a much more palatable concept to people than sitting down maybe late at night and falling asleep while trying to read. So audiobooks are definitely out there and definitely desirable. The ebook sales, I found out, have far surpassed the hard copy audiobook sales. So digital delivery is now the way to go. And I can tell you from personal experience that will save you a lot of money if you do not press hard copy CDs. So the ebook sales, according to bookseller.com, are up 170% in 2009 at about 313 million. More fast facts, and you can read the fast facts, at your leisure, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of them. Last year, more than $1 billion worth of audiobooks were sold in the US alone, and most of these were targeted toward adults. 87% of the volume of books sold, audiobooks sold, including ebooks, targeted at adults. Teens and children, not so much, but if you have a book in the making that's targeted, not to say that sector of the population may not be embracing these books soon, because what kid does not listen, have something plugged into their ear almost all the time. I have 2 kids, and it's like, I wish I could plug myself into the MP3 player to talk to them sometimes. Audible.com, we talked about that, gets 350,000 visitors a day. That's a lot of people, probably more than are going to any of our websites, right? The last thing here, you can produce video, which I did for my client. He wanted something along with the audiobook. He also wanted, people to get to know him as a person. So you can say, well, I want to do an audiobook, but I also want to do video. And you can have a video companion, an interview with you, the author, where you sit down with a professional interviewer and have this exchange that's videotaped. And in addition to that, you don't have to just put it on video. You can also maybe include it at the end of your audiobook. And somewhere in the foreword or at the beginning of the book, you make mention stay tuned after the last chapter for a sit-down conversation with the author. Interesting, I thought, what buyers consider before their purchase. And we have 1 through 6. I added 7, which is those ratings or comments that people post. A lot of times you don't have much control over the ratings that people give you, but if you tell every single one of your friends that you wrote an audiobook and that it's at such and such a website for sale, please give me a comment, and you give all your friends a copy of the book, then in a way you can control what is being said about you. You can also do a lot of social media marketing for your audiobook and hopefully get some good comments that way. So price. The book that I produced this summer, the audiobook, is a 3-disc set that looks like this. This is a digipack. I really didn't want, for really environmental and green reasons, to have the hard CD case. People don't keep them. They end up in the landfill. This is a digipack case. They are more costly, but I liked how it allowed us to have a lot of artwork space, and I can hand this around later. We had several surfaces in which to put the contents, the author's photo, the author's bio, testimonials. I mean, we packed this thing with as much information as possible. I asked today, because this just went on the market a little while ago, and said, well, how much are you selling it for? And he said, $15.61, which seemed like an odd amount to me, but that's what it is. And so research has shown that about a 2-hour audiobook with additional printable worksheets and some video is going for about 15 bucks. So in the end, this is often not a huge moneymaker because depending on your duplication process and if you hire a producer or not, you may spend several $1,000s to produce the book. Then how many copies are you going to run and how quickly are you going to sell them and try to recoup your investment? You also have to think of, you don't want to sell a 2-hour audiobook for the same cost that someone else is selling a 6-hour audiobook. So you have to do a lot of research, kind of scour all the sites and see what things are going for. The downloadable books are a lot cheaper. You could get a download for $7. If you're getting educational content that spans hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of audio, it might be as high as $80. There's a huge price range. And I, could have done a million hours of research and not probably come up with an average because you have to take into account how long it is, what's the packaging like, what's the topic. If you're Barack Obama, I have a sample of his audiobook, you probably can charge more than the author whose book I produced over the summer. In doing some research to get ready for this, I did email the Library of Congress. Haven't heard back from them yet, but I'll let you all know what I find out. So the funny thing is that when I looked at the book that I produced the audio for, this book is 98 pages. So, there are many tricks. Exactly. Put a little bigger margin or do your chapter headings a little bit differently. So there's a couple of, different things to consider there. Testimonials, we'll come back to in a moment. Now, I looked up all kinds of things for length, like the average 300 to 350 page book is, what file size. The average length of audiobooks is 10 to 12 hours. The one I produced was only 2 hours. So obviously the price is going to be much less than if we had produced 10 to 12 hours. But really, when I sort of digested all the information about file size and how many megabytes is this book, it didn't mean a whole lot to me from a production standpoint, because if you are producing your book and you're looking at cost and you have to go into a studio and record the thing, you want to know how quickly can I read this book, okay? And I worked with an audio engineer in Arvada who was really a master at estimating. So we put our written material into a format which could be easily read aloud, just like a Word document, sent it to him, and he said, oh, it's X million characters, that'll take 2 hours to read, or something like that. And he was very, very close. So it was somewhat amazing. But in terms of your cost, you want to know, am I prepared to go in and read this, or is a voiceover artist that I hire prepared to go in and read this? Is it going to take 8 days, or is it going to take 1 or 2? Because when you go into a studio, you are paying either hourly or daily for studio time. And later on in the class, in your folders, I have kind of a cost breakdown of my experience at this particular studio. People consider the thumbnail image. Is it the book cover? Is it your photo? Is it the title? What is it? I was not a huge fan of the image on this book, but the printed book was printed before I became involved in the project. It's a revolving door. Honestly, when I first looked at it, I thought it was a telephone booth. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with flavor of the month? And then I started thinking, well, what is flavor of the month? So you really want to be cognizant of the image that you are portraying, and does it actually project what the book is about? The description is by far the most important factor. People want to know, well, why should I buy this? Why should I spend my money on it? And why should I spend my valuable time listening to your book? So in a description, which also could include testimonials, be honest. Don't tell them that the book is going to do X, Y, Z if it's not. That'll just come back to bite you. So have a compelling, honest description of why it's worth the money, what it will teach. You can break that description down into bullet points, make it somewhat digestible on the either hard copy or on your website, on Amazon, however you are delivering the book. And then audio samples. We got into a lot of debate about the audio sample in the book I produced. How long should it be? Well, the book itself wasn't very long. It's, maybe 2 hours to listen to. So I said, well, we don't want to give it all away. I want to pick like a short 2 to 3 minute snippet, and let's sell that. Other people with much longer books have samples online that are 5, 6 minutes, maybe even up to 12 minutes, depending on the topic and how many people are speaking in the book. So you just wanted to give people a good taste of what the book's about, but you don't want to, give it away for free. And then your ratings and comments, which I didn't really add on there, but you can somewhat influence those. So that's the why. So now you all want the audiobook, want to do it, but how do you do it? And there are 3 phases of production. This is your production phases sheet. It's probably the second thing in there. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, and then I'm going to play a sample of the audiobook which I produced, and later in the class we're going to play several samples from other audiobooks, and try to just be thinking actively about everything you hear and where that would fit in one of these phases. Because so often we are so used to passively listening, and you might hear music and a voice and this and that and the other thing, and it just kind of slides right by. So I want you to actively think, where does this fit in? What was the process that went into that element? So pre-production is number 1. Pre-production is, that's not working. I could just talk about it. Pre-production is anything that happens after you've written your book, but before you've gone in to record it. So these are some of the things that you'll need to do. So you have your book, right? Now you need to find a recording studio with a good audio engineer, and there are several in the local area, and you can call around and check prices and ask the person, have you ever produced an audiobook? Have you ever engineered the production of an audiobook? Because it's very different than the production of music, for example, for bands going in and laying down tracks. It's very different. The editing process is different, and you want somebody with specific audiobook experience. There are a lot of local people. Yes, bless you. We can talk about that later if you want to know specifics. Yes, question is the software different for audiobook recording as opposed to music recording? And the answer is, I think it probably depends on the audio engineer, what software they're comfortable using. If they're using Pro Tools and they love it, they can use it for everything. I think it would probably be up to them. I don't think there's any limitations either way that would be for music at certain decibel levels versus spoken word. Yeah. So you're going to find a place to record it, you're going to find a good audio engineer, and you're going to print your book in a format that's easy to read aloud. Why wouldn't I take this into the sound booth and record this? I already printed my book. Why do I have to print it another way?
Page turns.
Page turns. Can you imagine how cumbersome it would be? Okay, I got to put weights on the book and hold it down. then you can hear the page turning, and one sentence might not finish, so your page turning in the middle of a sentence. That's a disaster in the audio booth. So you always have to put your book in a nicely printed document that if you do a Word document, make sure you edit it and make sure every sentence finishes on the page, or pop that up to the next page. You cannot be sliding papers in the audio booth while you're recording. So these are just the little nitpicky things that if you don't do first, it will be so much more time consuming in the booth when you're paying for that. You want to do that first. So print it in a really easy to read aloud format. If you have glasses or contacts, you might want to print it in large print. You'll have a lot more paper, but it'll be much easier for you to get through than trying to squint and say, well, what does that say? I mean, I wear contacts, and by this time of the night, I can barely read anything. So when you're in a sound booth recording for 8 hours at a time, you get a little fatigued, vocally and eye strain. So then you're going to decide, am I going to read my book aloud, or am I going to find a voiceover artist? And again, locally, we just happen to live in a very rich community full of voiceover artists. Many are represented by agents. You're going to pay a little bit more for that because the agent has to make his or her money, 15% usually on top of what the vocal artist charges. But there are a lot of people who do freelance, and if anybody needs tips on how to find these people, I can happily offer those after class as well. Then you want to select music. We're going to play some samples later where some people chose to use music and some people didn't. Personally, I'm a big fan of music. I think it sets the tone. If you find the right little number, it's not going to be playing throughout the whole book, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then you pot it down as the voice continues. It just really is a scene setter. I mean, can you imagine going to a movie where there's no music in the trailer or anything like that? I think it really adds a lot. Some people choose not, though. Then you need to write the foreword and the cover text and the testimonials. You can interview people who've read the book to get the testimonials. Sometimes, if you're not a writer of self-promotion, this can be hard. How do you, toot your own horn and talk about how your book is the greatest book ever? Sometimes it's easier to have an outside party do this for you. Have somebody read the book, really evaluate it, kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what it's about, and recap it for you. So the second phase is the actual production, which has the fewest bullet points here, but probably takes just as long as anything else. So now you're ready to move on and you're ready to record. So you're either going to hire somebody or you're going to do it. If you're going to do it yourself, you have to make sure that your voice is really strong that day. And if it's not, cancel the session. You don't want to spend $900 to go in and read something where you're hoarse or you're getting over a bad cold and it doesn't sound like you. You have to really be ready. Avoid dairy products, things like that.
What's a reasonable price range for voice talent?
A reasonable price range for voice talent really depends on the level of experience with the talent. I can never answer your questions specifically. You could find someone who's just doing it on their own, who may charge, I don't know, you could charge like $300 for a very short 30-second commercial script. For something like this, which is much more lengthy, you would probably pay someone by the day, and you would estimate, or have your audio engineer estimate, how long do you think it'll take this professional person to read? They'd say, well, the book is X number of characters long, it'll take them 9 hours. Well, that's probably 2 studio days. You can't really expect somebody to sit down and read for 9 hours. You need a break, you need water, etc. So you have 2 days. So you might pay someone, about up to $1,000 a day. For good voice talent. It depends on if they have an agent or not. Then you have to negotiate the price with the agent. If you're just working with someone directly and you say, hey, maybe you can do a trade, we're going to swap out some stuff. I would say minimum, if you're getting somebody in there for a day, yeah, I mean, when I do voiceover work, if it's just an hour or two, it's $500 at the minimum. So you could probably say, okay, well, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 days of work, let's call it $1,000 a day, something like that. But it's not cheap. And along those lines, I'm a big fan of hearing the author's voice. I would rather hear the author read his or her own words than a professional voiceover artist. So let's just say you decide to voice it yourself. It is still a good idea to have a producer go in with you. As you sit in kind of the soundproofed, isolated booth, have the producer or a friend or your spouse or someone sit next to the audio engineer to listen for flubs. The audio engineer is busy looking at the board and making sure the audio levels are perfect. And also, the audio engineer is very busy after you stumble over a word, backing it up, kind of re-editing as they go. You need just a pair of ears just to listen, to say, well, the inflection on that wasn't quite right. That's not how you talk. Or you might want to emphasize this word. In the book that we did take 2 days to record it, and I'm telling you, after lunch, there's a lot less energy in your voice as you're kind of dozing off to sleep than there is at 8 o'clock in the morning when you've had your coffee and you're raring to go. So we would stop and I would say, come on, Martin, let's get it together. You just need somebody who's going to be your advocate, not the sound engineer, but somebody else listening to you to make sure it sounds like you. All right, so the next thing is the post-production. Post-production, and then I really could have added a fourth, which would be, duplication and distribution, but I kind of lumped that into post-production, either or. The post-production, after you've recorded your book and you're ready to go, you still need to add in the beautiful music that you've chosen, and you need somebody with a really good ear, whether the audio engineer or a producer, to decide where is the music coming in, how long does the music stay in, how do we fade it out, how gradually does it leave, is it interrupting and competing with my words? There are all these things to consider with music. You need also someone to listen to your entire audiobook before you make any move to duplicate it and before you approve the master. I was so surprised over quality control checkpoints, things that I assumed would be fine, but I would double and triple check just to make sure. Every single time I did that, I found something. And I was so glad that I had taken the time to double and triple check so that we didn't run 1,000 copies of something with a little hiccup or an echo. I mean, I found deep in one of the last chapters, just this little kind of repeat of a vowel, and I called the audio engineer and said, well, here's where it is, here's how far in the book it is, the time. And he said, how did you hear that? They had been listening to it too. But as a producer, if I'm going to put my name on it, I want it to be perfect. So I just, was real careful with, let's listen to it again. I drove around in my car. My kids knew the book by heart at the end of the summer. They were sick of it. Yes?
How do you feel about, or have you had much discussion on sound effects?
How do I feel about sound effects? Coming from a news background, I'm not a huge fan of sound effects. I like natural sound that naturally would occur in that situation. Obviously, when you're isolated in a sound booth, you may not be able to get the birds to chirp in there with you. So if you can find something that sounds natural and fits with the words and doesn't compete or take away, I'm okay with it. If it sounds kind of canned or it's one of those, like superhero-ish, kaboom or something, I'm not a big fan of kind of canned sound. But I do like natural sound. I don't often find that sound that didn't naturally occur adds anything. We did choose, in this case, to use a sound effect for kind of a tone to alert the listener when a corresponding printable item was coming up. So, for example, if this was a business book, if the author mentioned dashboard portfolio, ding, then the listener knows, oh, on my bonus disc, I can go and print that out. And I can customize that for myself. And we explain that at the beginning, and you'll hear that when I play the sample. But in general, I don't know, if it adds to it, if you feel like it'll really add to it. Okay, so then after you've done all the recording and the proofing and you've approved the master, if you're going to do CDs with labels like this, you're going to have to hire a graphic designer. I'm not a graphic designer. I tried to do this myself for a couple nights. It didn't work out very well. It was awful. So I said to my client, look, we need to get a graphic designer, a professional person who does this for a living, because I could be designing this for the rest of my life, and you want your book out. So we hired a graphic designer. We can talk about cost of that later, but you're going to need somebody if you're doing hard copy for sure, and you may even want somebody to do a page layout for you. If you're doing a website for your book, you might want a web developer to do that. I mean, we are authors, we are writers, we are interviewers. We are not all graphic designers and layout experts. If you have that background, great. Then you don't have to hire a graphic designer and you'll save more money. And that's about it. Then you need to find the way to duplicate your audiobook. There are so many packaging choices if you do hard copy. There are so many different kinds of things to put your CD in. There are so many different kinds of ink you can use on the CD label. Do you want to offset print? Do you want to, you know, whatever. There's just a million different ways you can go. So you're going to decide if I'm going digital or am I doing hard copy, and then start researching there. And I don't want to take up too much time with that. But the quality control checkpoints, again, in the pre-production phase, you want to make sure that your written book is written well. And you would be surprised at, you know, I'm sure you proofread this before you printed it, but you would be surprised when you go in the audio booth that you find, oh, that's not a complete sentence, or how do I read that aloud, or those 3 really big words strung together are almost impossible to pronounce smoothly. So you want to make sure before you do that, you know, that's in your printing out your book in an easy to read aloud format, that you do actually read it aloud and you're familiar with the copy. And then in the audio recording, you want to make sure that the voice is good, that the music sounds okay. You want to have somebody proof that. Again, we found errors every step of the way, despite our best efforts to avoid them and to edit them out on the fly as we recorded. And then in the graphic design, then the post-production, you know, you want to make sure that your packaging looks good, that the layout looks good, and have a few people proof this for you. Because after a while, you've looked at it too many times and you can't catch the mistakes. And being the English minor that I am, I majored in journalism, but there were even things on here where we went round and round. I said, that doesn't need to be a comma there. Okay, but if your client wants the comma there, the comma might go there. If you want it there, I might say, okay. That's not in the grammar rule book, but it's going there. So there are just different things that you really want to look at. And then you need to have a barcode, some way to sell your book. This one doesn't have it. This was kind of our sample. But you need to have a way for this to be, you know, priced and rung up and sold online and in person. Okay, so now that we know our 3 areas of, do you have an eraser? Our 3 areas of pre-production and post, and then we'll kind of leave this out. Let's sort of, I have a Kleenex or something I could use. Let's sort of listen to this first bit of the audiobook and see if you can just even yell out what you hear and where it should go. Or maybe because we're going to be listening, we'll listen and then we'll yell it out. Okay, that might work better. Okay.
Honk Media presents a Looking Glass Development Press publication. The audio recording of Flavor of the Month, a leadership fable about management mantras, methodologies, processes, and practices, by Martin Vanderscow. Read by the author. Preface.
Thank you.
Martin Vanderskouw's Flavor of the Month represents a common-sense approach to business leadership, gleaned from more than 20 years of experience as a corporate executive and leader. His ideas are easy to grasp and ready to implement, so senior leaders can accomplish more with less. The key? Remove the roadblocks to success and give others the ability to lead. Upper-level management will appreciate Vanderskouw's no-nonsense leadership style, promoting true servant leadership. Senior leaders will learn to invert the pyramid, lessening their own workloads, while giving their team members the skills they need to succeed. Flavor of the Month will cause senior leaders to take a good, hard look in the mirror, examining their own leadership styles. If they don't like what they see, they'll now have the skills to change. When you hear this tone, you'll know the concept being discussed has a corresponding printable tool available on your bonus CD.
Dedication. This book is dedicated to my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life. Thank you, Amy, for everything you do. Chapter 1. Reality. Jim Calvin asked his assistant, Jenny, to hold all his calls as he walked into his office. He needed time to think.
Okay, so you may also have noticed I wrote the foreword for him and then I voiced it. And the voice that I used to be the professional voiceover artist is a little bit different than my normal speaking voice. So something to consider if you're thinking of voicing it yourself. Do you want it to sound like you? Do you want it to sound like the slick version of you? Okay, and have you practiced that slick version of you before you go into the sound booth, which is important. It takes time. It was 12 years of anchoring morning shows for 4 hours to get some semblance of a slick voice. So what did you all hear? What did you hear in there? What are all the elements and where do they fit? And you can just go ahead and yell them out.
Background music.
The background music. Okay, where does that fit?
The intro.
Right, so we used two different pieces of music. One was for the foreword, and one was for each chapter. And we used the same bit of music to start each chapter, but there were two pieces of music that you heard. So somewhere in here, in the pre-production, you had to do the music selection, right? And then somewhere in the post-production, you had to edit in the music. The music was not playing behind Martin as he was speaking. He never heard the music. So that was selected and then edited in. So what else did you hear besides music?
Sound effect.
The sound effect? Okay, so the sound effect was in the post-production, once again edited in. And in fact, it wasn't until we really got to the end of post-production that we decided to use the sound effect. And we said, oh hey, we should let people know about these printable things because we're spending so much time developing them. And I always laugh when I hear it because it sounds like Tinkerbell in the Disney movies, which now I realize I may have gone with a lower tone, but live and learn. What else did you guys hear? The music, sound effect.
You resold the book.
Yeah, and we had a voiceover, not the author, kind of prop up the book and say how great the book is. Because it might have, and how great he is. It might have been awkward for Martin to say, I'm so great and I have all this experience. So we did a lot of writing. We did a lot of writing for the foreword and kind of the synopsis of the book. And then we did 2 voiceovers, mine and his, in the studio. So when we rented studio time, you know, I went in and did my bit, which just took a little while because it was pretty short, and then he went in and read for 2 days to finish the book. What else is in there? Anything else?
The dedication.
The dedication, yes. And so that was writing, which would really be, you know, the foreword, the promotion of the book, and then the dedication, which was short and very heartfelt, and the author wrote that himself. So there was a lot of pre-production involved in just the minute and a half or whatever that you heard. All of these things happened. Okay? Did anybody hear anything else? I think we've about covered it. Let me just check my list. Okay, then in the post-production, we did a lot of proofing, just to make sure that everything we edited in sounded right, and that the music didn't suddenly drop off in the middle, that it faded out. I think what I heard was maybe a little bit too quick of a fade for my taste, but we wanted to, you know, let's get into just letting the author have the stage at that point. And then the design and the package and everything would come in post, not something that we heard, but something to consider before doing any duplication. So what do you guys think about the most common question that most people have when considering an audiobook? Would you read it yourself, or would you want to hire someone? Any thoughts on that? Would anybody feel comfortable later on in the class reading a sample of their book or a couple paragraphs? Would you do that? Okay, because I have some equipment here, and we'll just put a mic on you and you'll read, a paragraph. And then during the break, I will download everything to my laptop and we will listen back as a class, because reading it is different than hearing yourself reading it. It's kind of like being on camera. When you're not used to being on camera, you say, oh my gosh, is that me on camera? That doesn't look anything like me. But yes, it is. And it's the same with your voice. You might hear your own voice and say, I didn't know that was me. That doesn't sound anything like I hear myself. So that's going to be something to consider. Yes?
Do you do any augmentation, or was there any discussion of sonic augmentation in terms of voice? And I think everyone is probably familiar with the software that was used on Share. I think was the first big breakout
yeah.
on whatever.
That kind of robotic.
Auto-tune,
yeah.
Yeah. Is that being done in audio production now?
Is there any augmentation of the sound is the question.
Can you make me sound like
yes,
Darth Vader?
You can. There's audio sweetening, it's called, and people spend a lot of time and a lot of money on that, but it's one of those things, again, that I'm not a big fan of spending a bunch of time and money trying to make you sound like someone that you're not. I'm a big fan of the authentic self. This is the author. Martin may not have the world's most exciting voice, but he's really, really good at what he does. He speaks all over the place, and that's who he is. And so, I never would have suggested, I did suggest things like, let's pep up the energy level, or can you read like he might get going like a freight train? Can we slow it down so people can absorb? But yes, you can, but no, we didn't. But you can. You can really do anything with somebody's voice. You could make somebody sound like the Chipmunks if you wanted to. Okay, so I have a couple of examples that I would like to play of other audiobooks, and we can listen to, did people choose to read it themselves, or did they choose a voiceover artist? And try to decide what is the best route for you to go. The first one is a very familiar voice. Maybe not right off the bat, but someone you'll all recognize. Sometimes the music can tend to get lengthy.
Random House Audio presents The Audacity of Hope. Thoughts on Reclaiming the American Dream by Barack Obama. Read for you by the author.
Bet he regrets this.
Reading the audiobook or having it in general?
Having it available for commentators
Right.
to play excerpts.
Oh, there's a lot, yeah. That's probably the least of his excerpt worries, right?
It's been almost 10 years since I first ran for political office. I was 35 at the time, 4 years out of law school, recently married and generally impatient with life. A seat in the...
So what do you guys think of Barack
just
Obama
like-
reading his own book? Was that a wise move?
Very.
Very.
Except for the excerpts.
Right. But he, you know him. He's a familiar figure. He does have a great voice. I mean, he does. He has a wonderful voice.
And great pacing.
Very modulated, good pacing. I liked the selection of music in that. I think it went on too long, but I liked there was music. Here's another one where I really like the music. You can listen to how it sets the tone. Okay. Here's another, I think, great music selection.
Blackstone Audio presents Columbine, written by Dave Cullen and read by Don Leslie. Author's note on sources. A great deal of this story was captured on tape.
So this gets a little bit long, but do you see how the music really set the tone? You knew right off the bat before you heard a word that this is a pretty weighty topic and needs to be taken seriously. One thing I didn't like is that the music completely faded out and there was silence before any words were spoken. And you kind of run the risk of losing people almost, like, is there something wrong? Why can't I hear it? And then they start monkeying around and you haven't quite gotten them where you want them to go yet. There was one more I wanted to play. I think it's this one that didn't use music and just felt a little bit flat, although I'm sure the topic is great.
Penguin Audio presents Stones into Schools, Promoting Peace with Books in Afghanistan and Pakistan by Greg Mortensen, read by Atosa Leone. To the noble people of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and to the 120 million school-aged children in the world who are deprived of their right of education. Forward by Khalid Hosseini.
So she reads this. She identifies herself, probably a native person. What would have been the music choice there if you were to put music in? What would have added so much to set the scene? Middle Eastern music. Maybe even something that you recorded while you were there to write your book. Something really authentic. So that's just some examples I wanted to show, use of music, use of different voices. Do you read it yourself? Do you have your voiceover artist identify herself or not? A lot of different choices can be made. So I'm going to check about, 5 minutes. Well, the question is what type of music was considered something we'd have to pay for or not. Right. We paid for it.
You did?
Yeah.
And was that complicated?
It wasn't complicated at all. There are a bunch of websites. We used, I think, Sound Bakery. There are a bunch of different websites. If you just Google, sound, you can get royalty-free sound. You can pay the fee to use the sound. And if you're going to do this a lot, you can buy files or CDs of business music, entertainment music. It's broken into different genres. And so we found just some music I felt worked well. And with that, let's take a short break. You can get some coffee. Part 2 of our class, hopefully you were able to get some coffee and run around the parking lot and get a lot of energy for this second portion of the class. So I just had a great question about reading the book. If it's a novel, should you read with expression? Maybe should you try to do the character voices? We were talking earlier, I do all kinds of voiceover, and to me the easiest stuff to do is read the dry, most boring instructional video ever, because it's easy. You don't have to think about, I'm going to be this character and I'm going to be this character and this character, but some people are great at character voices. We earlier talked about the big question of, should I hire a voiceover professional or several in the case of characters, or should I read it myself? And so a couple of people, 4 people volunteered to read portions of their book. And so what we're going to do right now is listen to those. And not only so, the readers can hear what their voice sounds like to others, but so that we can all chime in and constructively critique people's vocal work. Not everybody is a professional voiceover artist, and not everybody has to be. I said earlier, and I'm just a huge believer in the book being an authentic representation of your work. I like to hear from the author. I like to hear from the real author, how the author actually sounds on a day-to-day basis, not some slickly produced version of that person. If there are particularly distracting elements about your voice, a speech impediment, a tough to understand regional accent. I'm not looking at you because I like your accent and it was very easy to understand. But if you have, you know, something that people have said it's hard to understand you probably want to work on those things, you know, cosmetically, because you want to get your message out. And even though it was hard to hear Stephen Hawking's computer robot voice, you know, that's just what he does. So you would expect no less, right? Yeah. The question is, what about recording in other languages? Having the book translated into Spanish or something like that? Yeah, you can easily do that. You just find a voiceover artist and then you find a transcriptionist or translator. Of course, it's going to cost X amount of dollars per transcription and for the voiceover, but you certainly could do that if you want to sell your book in other languages.
So there isn't a company in India that does that?
We were just joking around. I do a lot of voiceovers for Indian companies because they can't find anyone in India with a very flat, middle American accent. And so I do a lot of that for them, which is great for me. You know, I hope nobody like me moves there and starts taking over my gig. But you could certainly have your book translated. And it's pretty easy to find at agencies in Denver, or on Craigslist, for example, voiceover artists who do work in other languages. Yes?
Christine, a large part of my book is dialogue between a trainer and a participant, or two participants. And it's a pretty big percentage of the book. So I'm not a buyer of audiobooks. How do people handle those voices? Do people just read through them, even if the voice is female or has a British accent, or?
Yes. The question is, how do you get around producing dialogue?
Yes.
I mean, in the case of, I'd have to look more closely at the book, but I would say if it's true dialogue and not a narrative, then I would want to get several voices to actually read that. I would. A lot of the instructional videos that I voice for the clients in India involve dialogue. And so I might be the narrator, or another day I might be, you know, a voice, and there's two male voices and two female or something, and we all get together. And it's much easier to play off of one another and actually ask the question in authentic inflection when you have the characters there. Yes.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
So now you got to hire 4 people instead of 1. I did have an example. I will look for it as we're listening. I did have an example of an audiobook that used several different voices, and also one that you recommended to me, Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos, has an audiobook out called Delivering Happiness, where the first, you know, bulk of the book is the author reading, and then he gets into letters posted to his website, comments, or letters from his employees that were dropped in the comment box in the employee lunchroom. And he actually had the people come in and read their letters, which I really liked too, because honestly, it's a long book, and I had, you know, almost had enough of listening to his voice, and it was really nice to hear the other people in their words and their real emotions express their frustration or their elation or whatever the emotion was. So, okay, let's take a listen to what you all did here in class. And I recorded this just for my ease on one file, so there's a little noise in between of me miking people, and I'll try to get through that as fast as I can. But just kind of think of, you know, constructive critique that you could give to your classmates about their vocal delivery. And by the way, I liked everybody's delivery. I wouldn't voice any of your books. I would have you do it.
Leading with Heart by Ethan Roth. In my first job out of high school, I was a clerk on the railroad. One day I was struggling with figures that wouldn't balance. I asked my supervisor to take a look. "Why did you make that calculation?" he asked. I started to reply, "Well, I thought." Before I could finish the sentence, he snapped at me and said, "That's your problem. Don't think, just do it. Needless to say, if I'd taken his advice, I wouldn't have attained my high level of education, experienced a variety of enriching careers, or be writing this book for you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll take the microphone away. That was awesome. Thank you. And what we'll do is have a few people read, whoever would like to volunteer, in the next couple of minutes. And then during the break, I'll take some time to download everything and we can listen back to it.
On the shoulders of giants. Chances are, if you are hiking up a mountain trail, you'll exchange information with others on their way down. They may offer helpful suggestions about upcoming obstacles or point out sights to enjoy which you may have missed on your own. Maybe you'll stop them to ask for more detailed information. In these exchanges, you've enriched your own journey while offering others a chance to make a positive difference. Before you can walk in the shoes of those you admire, it helps to first stand on their shoulders. One of the most valuable pieces of advice I was ever given: emulate to learn, but innovate to earn. Those featured in 50 interviews offer proof that with enough desire and persistence, anything is possible. To find success, they each blazed a new trail and became innovators. There are two types of people in this world: those who ponder and those who act. 50 interviews showcases the latter, offering an honest glimpse into the mindset of a true entrepreneur. Their answers offer real-life wisdom, insight, and practical advice that you can put to use now. These entrepreneurs are living proof that you can create something from nothing and that without risk there can be no reward. They teach us that failure is the pathway to success, a burning passion, the essential fuel, and having a purpose greater than ourselves is the key to fulfillment.
Thank you. Some comments. I know you didn't have the opportunity to do this now, but if you were actually recording this and you stumbled over a word, we'd stop, we'd go back to the beginning of that sentence and retake it. So you never have to worry that you didn't get it right, because it's not live. The beauty of the recorded audiobook. Of course, it'll take you a lot longer and you'll pay more in studio time if you stumble in every sentence, but the pressure is really off because you can start and stop a million times. And if you have a good sound engineer, they can edit on the fly, which will save a lot of editing time at the end. You could make, the question is, the two comments and questions are, what do you do if your writing style doesn't match your speaking style? And then in the case, what I was going to mention to Brian is, something I wrote down is talk, don't read. It's difficult. You could rewrite the book into an easier audiobook to speak aloud, or you could practice it a few times where it becomes more conversational. It's kind of like listening to NPR or watching a newscast. Those news anchors are all reading off a teleprompter or reading from a written page. Almost no one is ad-libbing, but they sound like they're talking to you, or they should. That's the goal. So little words like the word a. Normally, if I was going to say, I have a dog, I wouldn't say I have a dog. I would say I have a dog. And so you really just have to listen to your conversational style and try to translate that into your audiobook and catch, it's little words that are going to flub you up, like the versus the, a versus a. The little things that are different in the way we talk or how we read aloud.
So news anchors do have some talent.
Yeah, not just robotic, but yes. And it's inflection and it's, adding your emotion, energy, and allowing yourself to shine through. And I think if you had had the opportunity to read that aloud 10 times, it would have sounded much different if we had time to do that. If you don't catch it on the first read, it can be added in post-production. You can do two things. You can take out every breath and pause, or you can add in seconds of silence in between for emphasis. But again, it is cheaper for you if you can do this during the read rather than in post.
And what does editing on the fly mean?
Editing on the fly, well, the sound engineer that I worked with for this audiobook this past summer is the only person I've ever worked with, and I do a lot of voiceover work, the only person I've ever worked with who could do this editing on the fly, where if you stumbled over a word, obviously, we're going to say stop, let's pick it up from here, and he would, on the fly, delete the stumble, and edit the new perfect version right to the end of the last sentence, so that we didn't have to spend literally days, which is normal, in post-production. So it saved us probably 2 to 3 days of editing.
He sees
was
waves
brilliant.
like
Exactly. So the sound, the software that he used shows the voice, and he knew right where to cut it and how to put that split second of a breath in between a sentence, even though it wasn't there. It was brilliant, brilliant. Did somebody else have a question? You know what? I don't even know how to rephrase that question. Let's see. How do you make sure that people can understand and retain the material if you're only saying it once? It's a little different than listening to a radio newscast or watching TV news, because you only get one pass, and that's gone forever. It's a live broadcast, they say it, and it's gone. So they need to, on the radio or on TV, tell you what they're going to tell you that, and tell it to you again. That's the rule of writing in broadcast news, which is what I teach at CU. So I'm always telling my students, give me a clue as to what you're about to tell me what you're going to tell me, and tell it to me again in different words, so that it doesn't sound boring or repetitive. But with an audiobook, you do have a chance to hit pause, go back, replay, play that chapter again. And in the case of the book that I produced, we added in printable elements and put a little tone in, which I think you may have missed at the beginning of class. Oh, okay, you got that. So we did the tone, and then they would go, oh, all right, well, if I didn't quite get that the first go round, I can print that out and listen to that again. So there is a little middle ground. I don't think you need to be as repetitive as you do in a one-pass situation, if that makes sense. Did anybody else have questions? So the question is, you know, would you as a producer or an author recording your book want to know what software they're using? And I'm smiling because I am the biggest technophobe on the face of the earth. And you could tell me the software and I don't know. It's another language. It was sheer dumb luck, honestly, that I sat next to this guy and said, wow, you're editing on the fly. And I don't care what the software was. All I know is that it saved my client a lot of money, and I was happy about that. But if you're a person who knows about software, certainly, like my big point at the beginning was, if you're going to find an audio engineer, find one who's done audiobooks, for sure, and not music or commercials or short form material, but long form. And if you know the software and the limitations of each, it's just not a language that I speak. I really have been lucky to rely on talented individuals to get me through that part of the job.
I think skill is just as important as the software, though, 'cause you have to be really
The skill of the audio engineer is definitely as important. Although I'm sure that there are certain softwares that maybe wouldn't allow somebody to edit on the fly like that, or there would be other limitations. So if you speak the language of editing software, then by all means do that.
Well, audition your engineer. I mean, you know, a chimp with a really good hand is not going to build your really nice house.
Good point. Yeah, maybe you can do an audition. I mean, to walk into a studio, you're going to be paying some studio time. But if you want to, go in and sit with somebody for a half an hour, read a little bit, bring some music along, see how quickly they can edit, just pay for an hour of time or whatever before you get into a 5-day deal and you're stuck.
Sit in on another session.
Yeah.
See how they go, if they're a screamer or if they're nice to you.
Exactly. And you kind of can get a sense of, and I'm happy to offer advice to anybody who wants it on various personalities at different studios, because I've worked at a lot of different studios, just going into the booth and voicing, not sitting in the editing so much, but you can kind of get a sense of people right off the bat. Okay.